Okay, my first question is very openly phrased, very general. Why is this war happening?
This war happening because we have bad neighbor near us who is imperialistic and who is still living by the old stuff which they had in past.
Well, this war is happening because of the everlasting narrative of like restoring basically the Soviet Union, I would say. Like, you know, like when I'm speaking Soviet Union doesn't mean that this name or this idea behind like politically is going to be introduced. It's more like this kind of imperialist notion of like having a lot of other ethnicities or nations under one rule and exploiting them, or like kind of making this whole like Russian world so-called like possible in many regions that used to be like associated or part of the USSR previously.
Well, I think this war didn't start a month ago. This war started much earlier on. It is a conflict between some imperialistic powers.
From my perspective, I consider this like changing a bit like the hierarchy and like this kind of global dominant country in the world now. So like Russia, who is aggressor in this war, try to somehow put themselves in the new hierarchy.
My opinion is that, of course, the situation was brewing from at least 30 years. Of course, it is not to debate that this attack of the Russian state and the Russian state try to just get back with the new order in the region.
Geopolitics, because we have China, we have Russia, and we have their leaders, and they have their own interests, imperialistic interests, we can call this that way.
Like now we had a fight between USA and China for like the global domination. Russia cannot be part of this because it's too weak, but they want to fight for the best position in the new order.
On the contrary, Western Europe, but also Ukraine was starting to get a switch when there is talk about energetics and power supply.
But it's also like interest of many business groups, like you can imagine, like resources and oil and this gas stuff. So it's a war about money.
They were trying to switch. For example, when it goes to gas, they were going to switch from Russian gas to American one, and of course the Americans also were they were investing huge amount of money in Ukraine.
And also, if we will take the personal scale, that's all because of power and because of this biological mechanism in every human body. Like when you're getting power, you're getting some kind of drugs, dopes, and so on. So those people are addicted from power. But if we're gonna see this from the common scale, of course, it's because of their political and geopolitical interests.
So to go a little bit more specifically, there is a certain narrative presented by the Russian Federation and the Putin regime about why this war is happening. It projects a number of excuses, but I would say the main, if we can focus on some of the very main ones, it's first about denazifying Ukraine. It's about protecting the populations, the ethnically Russian and Russian-speaking populations, particularly in the area of Donbass, where they claim there has been a genocide against them going on for the past 8 years. And finally, that it was a necessity for them to counter the ever-expanding NATO and the perceived threat from that expansion and its potential ballistic capacities and so on. So let's address this narrative, and one by one. And tell me, what is your response to the excuse of denazifying Ukraine?
Yeah, well, overall, I call bullshit on all of those arguments. One by one, about denazifying Ukraine. Ukraine didn't need denazifying, especially from the outside, in my opinion, because there were far-right groups. Some of them were causing trouble, but overall, Nazis didn't have much representation in political life, and their influence was diminishing over the last few years, actually. So about the denazifying, bullshit.
Well, my overall response is that all this is bullshit, but to be more specific, like what means denazification? Ukrainian state, of course, deserve a lot of critics, but this is definitely not a Nazi state. This is just a, propaganda statement. Nazi forces, or far-right radicals, of course, are present in this society, but they are still play quite a marginal role, actually. This is not. This is visible force. This is true, but this is not the force who really design the shape of the society by no matter they do this. Because of this statement is just a label, just an excuse to cover purely imperialist intervention and aggression.
Saying the government in Kyiv it's a Nazi government is just the pure propaganda created to justify what the Russia is doing at the moment.
Albo to jest operacja antyterrorystyczna, albo to jest operacja antyfaszystowska.
There are two ways, or attacking the fascists or attacking the terrorists. So that's the narrative when Russia in the history was invading another country.
Я думаю, что это полная вообще чушь и все такое.
I think it's all bullshit, and I can't see any reasons to trust this point because we have Nazis in Ukraine, of course, but they're not total amount of people. Also, Nazis are everywhere, and right-wingers are everywhere in Europe, in Russia, in every country.
For sure, there were some Nazi groups which we know about in Ukrainian, but they're also in Poland. We have some right-wing organizations which are completely Nazi, and there are Nazi organizations in Greece. All over the world there are Nazi organizations. I'm not sure it's the reason to attack another country and make a genocide.
And you can see Greece, which had Golden Dawn on the third position during elections. You can see Hungary, which is actually quite right-wing, and they have Jobbik.
We don't have any far-right parties in the government, in the parliament, for 2 last terms, I guess. And that's something that is not true about Germany, for example, with their AfD.
For the last elections, it was, as I remember, 2%. And it's much more less than in any European country. So about what denazification we are saying?
Myślę, że procent skrajnej prawicy lub
the percentage of the popularity of Azov and the party, which is in Ukraine, it's quite similar to the rest of Europe when we are talking about neo-Nazi. But the thing is that after Maidan, they have been able to make people being active military, so they gain power from this side as well because they were inside war. So that's why they got popularity on this side.
What actually they did 8 years ago, they helped Ukrainian Nazis to grow. First of all, because any war comes also together with nationalism and also Nazism at some point.
If war wouldn't start, so we could have absolute change of situation. So leftist ideas, progressive ideas, they started to be dominating here in Ukraine. And the main reason for right now why right-wingers could have some ability to grow, to rise and so, because of the war.
Completely on the contrary to denazification, the main force who galvanize nationalism and also anti-Russian hostility in ethnic means here in Ukraine is also Russian state aggression. So this is actually an attempt of Nazification.
Right sector, as a party, as a group, at the Maidan was represented by a small amount of people, but in media of Russia and all the satellites, right sector was like everywhere. In every, I don't know, house, every building, every person is a right sector. And like crazy Ukrainian nationalists and all that stuff. So they made good advertising for them. That's why right sector during Maidan became really a big thing. And then during the war, because like they was growing, because like every person was thinking, okay, to which battalion do I go for war? And like, okay, right sector, because like you know them. And Azov was in that time like much more smaller in the media represented. So like, and now we come into the same stuff. Like Azov is represented in Russian media like a big bubble, you know.
How strong is really the Azov battalion, and how did it come to the point to almost represent the Ukrainian army in terms of media attention?
How it became like the sole focus of media, it's probably has something to do with Russian state-owned media who function abroad, I think, because like in Ukraine itself there is much less attention to Azov.
Talking to Ukrainian comrades, they're not the major power, they're not that big as the people think they are, but all the cameras, all the news are about them because of what's going on right now in the Mariupol.
The Azov battalion is several hundreds of people, but Ukrainian army is many dozens of thousands of people. So, like, to portray the whole army with this infamous unit is, of course, once again, the dirty propaganda step.
They're not really creating their own armed forces. They are part of the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian army using every group which they can use to fight against the Russian occupation.
In a military structure, in like Ministry of Defense or something like this, Azov battalion do not have like any crucial ruling role or something like this. This is definitely, this I know for sure, is that it's definitely not the unit which is the, how to say, the driving force of the army, or some unit which really giving shape to the army or something like this.
In the same time, Russians got a volunteer battalion like Rusich, for example, and also Wagner's, plenty neo-Nazis.
If to bring deeper and to understand how the Russian government is connected with right wing, like nationalists, Nazis, all the people who was killing people, who was making some terror, and the history brings that they was totally in connect.
Hundreds of people killed during these years. These foreigners, they attack also leftists, they killed our comrades. We didn't have murders of comrades in Ukraine. It was always in Russia.
People in the government was supporting these people, and by their command they was killing like anti-fascists, journalists, different thinkers, everyone. So like,
you mean in Russia?
In Russia, yes. So like, what the fuck about what denazification we are saying if we need to denazificate Russia for first of all?
I mean, saying that they are the only nation who helping, like, who fighting against fascism is bullshit, like, obviously. So for me, leftists who believe it, they have kind of subculture that Russians, blah, 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 from 40s, that they are this anti-fascist.
When some comrades are telling me that I don't know, we have a Nazi state, Nazis are in governments and all this stuff. And when you're living in Ukraine and see the situation by your eyes, it just like goes in the laugh, because it's a lie, it's a lot of lie.
Next, about genocide of Donbas people. This I would also call bullshit, because there wasn't genocide going on by all accounts, except for Russian propaganda. Like everybody except Russian media, pro-governmental media, were denying that the genocide was happening, and of course we cannot trust fully the UN or other international institutions, but they still have better data, and they still more trustworthy on this issue than the Russian government, and they all said that there wasn't a genocide going on, and actually the military action in Donbas region before the war, it was also quieting down a little bit, especially since Zelensky took office.
I don't think we can call it genocide. For sure, maybe the people, Russian people, because of this growing of Ukrainian nationalism, they get some discrimination. But it's something that this information we get from media. I don't have direct contact with Russian people in Donbas, so we can base our opinion in the media, and there are no media that we can trust 100%.
For me personally, I'm from Donbas, I'm from Donetsk, and I can say as a refugee that all these points about that in Donbas live in some kind of special ethnic, it's total bullshit, and there's some kind of mythology they created and some narrative they created to have a basis for their actions.
I'm by myself also a Russian speaker whole life. I was born in Ukraine, and my family from my mother side, they all from Russia. Even in 2014 I was also in Lugansk and in near city Shastya named, and I didn't saw that there was some problems with Russian speakers.
The whole thing in 2014, it was made by Russian army, by Russian special forces servants, and by people who were already came from Russia, like FSB agents who were sitting.
They were controlled by the Russians, they were supplied by the Russian soldiers, Russian arms. There were never People's Republic in Donbas.
I was at that war with the people who natively from, let's say, this Russian-speaking cities from Lugansk, and they was not pro-Russian, they was totally pro-Ukrainian people, and they weren't some nationalists or Nazis or something. It was usual military people, who become military during the war, because before they was just usual people. Doesn't have anything with military during the life.
But they felt like they have to defend their community against some invaders.
Yes, they felt that they need to defend themselves and their community because of invaders who came to their land, and they didn't ask for any help at that moment. They didn't want that someone can come and was helping them, because there was no problem for them.
There's the usual Russian narratives about try to liberate people against many different enemies, but it's always sort of false. The same was in Chechnya.
Это тоже бред, и
It's some kind of historical things of Russia. So first they come into some territories, invading this, occupying this, and in some years the situation is changing. They're saying, oh, we are going to protect our people in this region, so we're going to send our army. So
the same narrative was used when Poland was invaded during the Second World War by Stalin. because they came to Poland to protect Russian-speaking citizens. The same narrative is used by Chinese government occupying Tibet, and in every case when someone is trying to attack another country, it's very easy excuse to use.
Like a Russian-speaking population genocide in Ukraine is something that Russia is doing right now, bombing Mariupol and Kharkiv and small towns in Donetsk and Lugansk region, such as Popasna, Severodonetsk, Volnovakha, and also putting people in filtration camps. That's not something that we made up. That's their name for those places.
The whole rhetoric about the Donbass being the People's Republic, it's all big lies, because when Russian-controlled forces occupied Crimea, Donbass, and Donetsk, all the territories, they created more or less like a fascist state. They brought, like you said, many tough laws, like death penalties, anti-homosexual laws, very strict military rule. It has nothing to do with the People's Republic. It is ideologically much more close to the fascist state than to the People's Republic.
About the expansion of the NATO, also bullshit. Because, the only argument Russian side has about this is that the willingness to join NATO was put into Ukrainian constitution several years ago during Poroshenko's time.
But still, we need to understand that this chapter appeared in the constitution after 2014 and after clear aggression of the Kremlin regime.
On the other hand, it was mostly just a declaration, and NATO said repeatedly that they are not ready to take in more participants, especially considering Ukraine. So this argument is also bullshit.
About NATO, it's like no one made anything more expanding threat of NATO than Russia made in past 30 days.
At the time, in the mid-2000s, I don't remember exactly, but it was either like 50-50 or even like more people do not support Ukraine joining NATO. Then after 2014, support among Ukrainian public to join NATO, it grew a lot actually, and but it still wasn't like predominant opinion. It was still like something like 60-40 or something like that. And after this full-on invasion started, of course now more than 70% of the people by recent polls support Ukraine joining NATO. So popularity of NATO increases with the escalation from and with threats from the Russian side, which is it's pretty obvious connection.
This narration that Russia was forced to bomb schools because they were forced by NATO to defend themselves is stupid, to be honest. It's just stupid.
But come on, if some country invades other country, so who is making a mistake and who is making the aggression? Not the victim country.
This idea that that actions of Russian army are the consequences of this threat of Ukraine joining NATO is really victim blaming thing.
The main force which push Ukraine towards NATO and towards Western powers is Kremlin's Russian imperialist aggression.
What other aspiration our state could have other than to join the NATO when we have such a big problematic country by our side that just captures whatever territories they like in the neighbor countries.
If the one population of geographical territory want to have independence from authoritarian state, it's going to be used by both sides.
During these days, it's hard for me to compare NATO and Russia. Of course, NATO makes some genocides like in Belgrade in 90s. So we cannot say like NATO is kind of hero that we want to follow or we can trust NATO.
NATO is not like a defender of the people. NATO is an armed forces of the capitalist and neoliberal states.
But at the same time, world is a bit more complicated than that, and if somebody opposes the NATO, it doesn't automatically mean that it's a good guy.
Now we get this situation that the bombs are coming from the Russian side to the civilian people.
There's always someone who makes the first step, right? Or who's actually creating atrocities at the moment, right? So we should speak about that.
We will not support NATO, but in this point I would like that NATO will, somehow save people's lives. And if the NATO will bomb some city in the future, then we will be against it.
If you're now against Russia, then really it doesn't have to mean that you are pro-USA. Yeah, and as left, we should really try to avoid that and to always see it otherwise, like not between the nations but between the classes.
We have to distinct it. It's not the anarchists supporting Ukraine against Russia. No, we are supporting people of Ukraine by invaded by the Putin's regime. That's the most important thing we have to look at. We are not supporting Zelensky government. We're not supporting neoliberal state they want to create in Ukraine. We're supporting the people of Ukraine who are fighting against the armed invasion.
There seems to be a distinct difference of perspective in regards to the question of NATO imperialism and Russian imperialism coming from leftists and anarchists that come from any country neighboring Russia, all the way from Finland to Kazakhstan. What do you think that means?
It's mean good member from the history. Like these post-Sovietic countries, of course, they have direct occupation, let's say, or dependent from the Soviet Union. The Finland has always wars with Russia or Soviet Union. So, like you said, it's like the point where you're sitting is describe what you need to believe, because I can imagine that if you have two narratives and you are living somewhere in America, it's hard for you to know. You can just say it like theoretically I think they have a right, but like the direct experience are super important.
It's way easier to think about that being in France or being in Brazil, let's say, or Argentina, because you're not neighboring with Russia. The biggest problem that you have, being in Argentina or Brazil or whatever, or in Chile, let's say mostly South America, you have problems with American imperialism.
That's a territory of big interest from Western imperialists, I think, but we are more under control and under suffering from Chinese and Russian imperialists and Russian forces. That's why this is our reality, and that's how we that's the context we are living in and trying to survive and to develop ourselves.
Living for all my life really in basically a colony of Moscow. I'm not thinking of myself as part of a German colony. So it's this is why my perspective comes from another enemy, you know?
We, as anarchists in Poland, we supported refugees from Belarus or from Russia. I mean, our comrades were escaping the jail sentences. They were escaping the witch hunt in Russia, in Belarus, and we've seen many of our comrades in jails in Russia or in Belarus, and from the first hand we know how that state can work.
I don't know any anarchists who supported pro-Russian forces or LDNR, DNR. Like, no one here is doing this.
A lot of people left Russia because of repressions toward leftist people, and the same with Belarus. And people who escaped to Ukraine, our comrades, they are fighting for Ukrainian people now.
Our comrades in Russia, they've seen it from their own perspective. Like every struggle against the Putin's regime can put you in jail or in the coffin.
For sure, people will speak from their perspective, from the places where they live, right? And from the realities they live in, and from the battles or struggles they are active in.
So I think that there are many different imperialism. Could be like Turkey imperialism also there's a problem too. It's quite the same in common things, but in implementation and practice of this, it could be different. It can use different tactics. Like, for example, we are fighting against Russian imperialism, and we could see that tactics, and other people are fighting against another imperialist, and they could see their tactics. And it would be nice to exchange the experience how it could be in different places of the world.
It's like the challenge for anarchists also, like, to describe to the population, right, that it's not about either or. Like, there is a third way, let's say, to think of it. Like, that you should not like just side with someone who is more powerful or who looks more like Western or more different from your oppressor. So it's just two different oppressors, and they are like fighting each other now.
We need to start getting organized. We need to start our discourse to be placed in this big geopolitics and so on. And we really need to start to seek for similarities and for our class attitude, not like, you know, cultural stuff, or I mean, it can be whatever else, and not to be just taken by the nose by this or that imperialists.